Bob Woodward. He joins me now. His new book, Rage, which includes more than a dozen on-the-record interviews with the president, is out now, and it's certainly gotten a lot of attention, as all of your books always do, Bob. And I'm sure you're glad to hear that the president has read the book, thought it was a little boring, but that he said some good things. I wanted to start with this question.
Well, he was also on your network.
Go ahead.
He was asked also about whether it's accurate, and he said, yes, it is. It's fine. So accuracy, of course, is important in all of this.
Well, of course, when you get on-the-record interviews for somebody and of the president's stature, I mean, what did you think of that, to actually get that much time with a president on the record? I mean, that's a little different from what you usually get.
Yes, I talked to him for 9 hours over a 10-month period in 19 interviews, and he allowed me to press him and ask on a range of issues, not just about the virus, but North Korea, race relations, and the economy. I think when you lay it out, it's a real window into his mind, what he was thinking, what motivated him.
It was an incredible amount of time for him to give to somebody. I did want to ask you this. So if COVID-19 had not happened,
suppose you'd been his...
What do you think the biggest takeaway from the book would have been?
Wow. I think I was going to start the book with General Mattis, who was the press secretary, and Mattis going to the National Cathedral, worrying about a nuclear exchange with North Korea. Not that Trump would start it, but the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un would start it. And in order to protect America, Mattis would have to make a recommendation to President Trump to use nuclear weapons. And as I quote Mattis saying, no one really has the right to incinerate millions of people. But as Secretary of Defense, who would have to give a recommendation to the president, that led Secretary Mattis to go to the National Cathedral, pray, and reflect on his duty and responsibility to protect the country.
And yet so much has happened since before COVID, and when you were planning to start off with that book, including what happened this week at the White House. Of course, this is after the book has already gone to print. But the president has this historic Abraham Accord that he announces between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain. And I wonder how that might have sat with you in terms of, you look at presidencies over the course of time. I mean, do you think that this is quite significant?
I think it's very significant. And a month ago, on August 14th, President Trump called me to see if I could get the agreement in the book. And I said, the book's done, it's printed. And I told him that it's going to be a tough book. I'm going to make some judgments that you're not going to like. And we returned to the issue of the virus. Now, this is 1 month ago, and he said, nothing more could have been done. Nothing more could have been done. I was astounded because so much more could have been done. And my evaluation is, based on the overwhelming evidence I have, that he failed as a leader to warn the American people about this coming virus when he knew on January 28th, it's been confirmed by Vice President Pence and the National Security Advisor. Go to that moment in the Oval Office. You've been in the Oval Office. I don't know whether you would go to the top-secret presidential daily briefs, but this is what it was. And Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor for the president, said...
Have you seen, Bob, though, that the statements that were being made by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Redfield and others as they were trying to figure out what this virus was like? The president has addressed this. He said that he both downplayed it and then he said he upplayed it. I think that is what it is. I do wonder, though, about going forward in terms of...
Which is it, downplay or upplay?
Look, people are going to have to make their own decisions because he has said both. we have what we have now. But right now, we're dealing with the vaccine issue. And as you know,
but
trust
he
in the
was
media is
giving
at an all-time low. And what do you think is the media's responsibility in talking about the vaccines?
I think to be as factual as possible. And go to that scene in the Oval Office, January 28th. Here's the president getting his top secret report. Oh, Brian, no,
Yeah.
Can I answer your question, please?
Sure.
And
Sure.
O'Brien says, Mr. President, this virus is not maybe, but is going to be the biggest national security threat to your presidency. Then the deputy, Matt Pottinger, steps in and provides specifics and Pottinger had been a reporter for the Wall Street Journal in China, and he tells the president, said, look, yeah, you know him well, and he's one of the great public servants. He was a great reporter, and he had contacts in China who told him that this virus, and he told this to the president that day, this virus is going to be like the 1918 pandemic in this country 100 years ago.
Right, so Bob,
that killed 675,000 people.
But
Sure.
I feel like we have talked about that particular issue in the Oval Office in the book, and the president has answered it. You have answered. We have seen with the other things that Dr. Fauci and others were saying at the time. I do want to maybe just ask you other couple of questions from a bigger picture perspective, because you cover presidencies writ large.
Of course.
And that is, the president promised to come in and drain the swamp and change Washington. Do you think he has done that, and for the better or the worse?
Well, I think, as he said the other day, that he said some great things in that book. My goal is to really interrogate him, and to his credit, he let me do it extensively about all of the issues, and he got his say. My surprise was on the virus. I'm sorry, 195,000 people, our citizens in this country, have been killed, and he should have stepped up and told the country the truth. He failed to do that. In the first interview I did with the president, I asked him.
Do you feel any responsibility to have said that beforehand, before waiting until Labor Day or the week after Labor Day to print that then? I mean, if you felt that strongly?
I felt strongly in May when I learned about that January 28th meeting. I did not know about that meeting at that point. If there was at any point, Dana, here where I could have printed something in the Washington Post, I have access to the editor, Marty Barron, directly, his sub-editors, if I think some story should be printed. All the discussion was about China, and in May, I learned the truth. Quite frankly, when I learned it, I was shocked that the president did not step up in the opportunities he had, like the State of the Union message, and say, by the way, Sure.
You decided at the end of the book to come to a conclusion, and your conclusion was that President Trump is not up to the job. You've known Joe Biden for probably over 40 years. You've covered his time in Washington, D.C. Do you think that he is the man for the job right now? And is he the same man that in 2020 that you've known over the years?
What I did in the last 4.5 years is report on Trump. I think as much as any outsider get close to him and his operations, so I'm able to make the judgment as I do that I believe with overwhelming evidence he is the wrong man for the job. I have not reported in depth on Joe Biden. I am not endorsing anyone. I'm just saying, and if anyone reads the book, you read the book. I mean, it's it's a nightmare working for Trump. You said publicly in April you would not have been his press secretary because he blindsided people, because he surprised people. That's part of the story in this book for Secretary of Defense Mattis and so forth.
Well, I should be clear, I was never asked to be his press secretary, but it is true. I think that the job is harder
Well, you
in the age of
volunteered.
Twitter when he weighs in.
And I don't blame you. I don't blame you for
no,
saying
look, he is his own best spokesperson, as I think that he showed when he agreed to do all of these on-the-record interviews with you. And from a journalistic perspective, when it comes to, setting aside the book for a moment, because I have you are a giant of journalism there in Washington, D.C. Do you think that journalists need to be a little bit more tough on Joe Biden? Does the president get this extra scrutiny, this negative coverage, and they cover for Joe Biden in ways that if you saw that press conference where they finally got to ask Joe Biden questions, it was things that were just the most easiest questions. And I don't know if that endears anybody to the press. I already mentioned that trust in the media is at an all-time low. I don't think that's necessarily helpful to anybody at this point. Let me give you the last word on the state of journalism today.
Listen, Dana, I learned journalism from Ben Bradley, who was the editor of the Post during Watergate, and he always said, be tough on everyone, ask all the questions. We're not in the business of, we want to have impact, so we provide information to people that they either accept or they don't accept. We are not in a political game, and the Bradley rule always was play it straight, play it aggressively. I can remember time and time again where I would have a story, have information, talk to him about it, and he would say, we got to print this. No, sometimes we're not ready, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to print it later. And so,
what would Ben Bradley have thought about your decision to make a conclusion in this book that weighed in as to whether or not you think President Trump should be president?
Yeah, that he's the wrong man for the job. Dana, if you've been able to read the book, the evidence is overwhelming. It is one of the saddest moments for this country to have a leader who has failed to tell the truth, who has failed to warn the people. I mean, look at this. He downplayed it. He upplayed it. The confusion in the message for somebody trying to figure this out. Should I send my kids to school? Can I go to the grocery store? What's the mess? The president has that megaphone, and people look to him as the one who is going to say, here's the reality. And if you distort the reality, you have failed in your job, and you are the wrong man for that job.
Okay, well, the American people get to vote on November 3rd and make their decision. One last question. Will you do a third book of the Trump presidency if he wins?
Let's see what happens. No one knows. I think.
Hey, that's the president's line. He always says, let's see what happens.
Yes, exactly. And I talked to the president about this, and I said it's going to be a toss-up, and that's my view, and he seemed to agree. I think either candidate can win.
All right. Bob Woodward, thank you for joining us.